Okay, time for a video I didn't really intend on doing here, but I recently nearly passed on Paladins of the West Kingdom, and I was wrong. Okay, so here's the scoop. I had a friend move out of town, and if you don't know this, in Alaska it's really hard to get rid of games, and they needed to downsize their collection only to take their absolute top favorites. And they were like, yo, Jack, can you take some of the games that I don't have time to get rid of because I need to scoot? And one of those games was Paladins of the West Kingdom. I was like, great. I've played some other Shem Phillips games, and this looks super interesting. If nothing else, it'll be a conversation piece to have on the Cardboard Herald. Even though I had so many other games to play, this wasn't really on the docket. It's not a review copy, and I'm busy enough with a ton of other projects. But I thought, hey, if it's something I dig, at least I'll have something that's fairly recent that I can talk about, a game that I've been meaning to cross off my list to get to the table for quite some time. And then I opened it. And then I put it on the table. And then I started reading the solo rules. Well, I started reading the normal rules, and then I read the solo rules. And I was like, oh, my word, this is a dense bit of game. And that's no joke, not even like metaphorically dense. This is a solid brick of complete game package in here with no hint of any sort of organizer that you may dare to speak of, but that's kind of the Garb Hill Games way. And that's cool. There's lots of components, there's lots of interesting stuff, but it is a lot to take in. And I'm going to be honest, I learned so many games for the Cardboard Herald, oftentimes for reviews that are obligations, review copies that are sent to me, that looking at this, I was just like, man, this is an uphill battle. I got other things to figure out. And so then it sat on the shelf for a couple months, and then I broke it out again. And I started to play it again, and for whatever reason, it just was not clicking. It just was an experience in and of itself just to try to learn the game. Not that it's entirely opaque, it's just there is so much information being conveyed by the game as it's set up in front of you. I was like, oh, okay, another time. And I actually considered getting rid of it at that point. Trade it, gift it, sell it, whatever. My buddy didn't have time to get rid of it, but hey, I'm not moving, so I had time to figure that out. It sat in this limbo status where I didn't want to necessarily get rid of it, but maybe I should. It was kind of in the not part of the collection pile. I don't know if any of you have that going on. Maybe that's a privilege item that us game reviewers have, but it was in the pending pile. I was like, okay, I gotta give it one more try. And so finally, early in the morning, as opposed to trying to learn late at night, I loaded up the rules on my iPad and was like, all right, I'm just going to read this here as like my morning cup of coffee thing to learn. And I am so grateful that I did. One, learn things when you are alert and awake and refreshed and are able to take them in, because that's going to help you understand things. And it clicked together so much more. I didn't have the game out in front of me, so I didn't have the sheer magnitude of the game to give me that like intimidating glare out of the corner of my eye as I'm flipping through the rule book, so that probably helped too. And I could read it start to finish and try to really grasp onto it. Second, I tried learning it as a multiplayer game first, not as a solo game. Oftentimes, I start learning games as solo games, and then we'll use that experience in order to teach other people, so that way we don't have that we're learning as we're going along experience. Well, my wife, who is an awesome gamer, she decided that she would help me out here. She would let me read and then kind of muddle through the first game with her together. And then I would learn solo afterwards. And between the two of these initiatives, lo and behold, I was able to make some sort of sense of it, and it really started to come together. Not that it is that complex of a game, but as we'll get into, there's just so much to contend with as far as the decision space, the ramifications of your decision, and more than anything else, knowing what is a good decision to make in the game versus a bad decision, because so many of these micro exchanges that you do with your workers result in small but incredibly meaningful differences in how your strategy is going to evolve. So with all that said, all that preamble, we probably should get into like, what is this game? And then I'll talk to you about why I'm so grateful that I ended up playing it rather than just letting it slip through my grasp as this bag of wood and cardboard. Or I guess it's a box, not a bag, but you catch my drift. Anyway, this is a worker placement game where the majority of the worker placement is taking place on your tableau, and that tableau can be modified. Everyone starts out with the same tableau, but you can make little evolutions on it that increase efficiency in specific actions. There is a common space of worker actions that develop as the game goes on throughout its 7 rounds, but for the most part, the action is happening on that tableau itself. One of the really unique things about this game is that the workers are not your personal workers, but a pool of workers that you acquire at the start of every round based off of a tavern card, a little drafting situation, as well as the paladin that you pick from your paladins that you draw into. Now these, for all intents and purposes, are like a gameplay modifier for this turn. The paladins are an identical stack of 12 paladins that everyone has, but they're shuffled individually, so you'll be drawing into different ones than your opponents. You draw into 3 paladins, and you're going to pick one that goes into play this turn, one that goes on the top of your deck, and one that goes on the bottom of your deck. So you're essentially staging when you're going to be encountering these guys next. All of them are going to dictate 2 specific workers that you're going to have access to on top of the drafted workers from your tavern, and then an ability that's going to modify how you play out your turn. They also have a modifier to one or more of your stats that you are going to use as like the default capabilities for pretty much anything that you're going to do to meaningfully acquire points. That comes down to influence, your military strength, and your religious piety. These 3 little flags that increase throughout the game and will be a decent source of points for you in the end by hitting certain metrics. Once you have your pool of workers, players are going to take turns placing workers on their board in order to take actions. The action spaces on the left half of the board are predominantly actions that are going to increase your efficiency, give you access to more workers, or manipulate the gamey aspect of the game for now. You can get new people who join your village that have ongoing powers, or discard those people in order to get one-time effects. You can clear out workers that have already occupied spaces, so that way you can utilize those again. You get resources that allow you to take other actions, as well as these little greenhouses that sit on top of specific worker locations in order to reduce the total amount of workers that you're going to need to take the more powerful actions that are going to acquire your points. The right half of the board is where you're going to interact with a lot more of the central board area by recruiting priests, building barracks, attacking invaders, or converting those invaders to become point barons on your side, giving you more bonus scoring at the end of the game. There's all kinds of stuff that you're going to do. Basically, you are doing an efficiency engine on your side. It's not quite an engine building game in that you're going to reach a certain level of automation, but you're trying to make it as efficient as possible to exchange the small pool of resources that you're going to have at the start of your turn in order to achieve the most possible success, with a limited amount of player interaction competing over the few worker placement spots that open up common to all players, as well as the invaders, the townsfolk, and the different locations that your monks and your barracks can get assigned to, which players are going to compete over. It's not a huge amount of player interaction, but it is a very meaningful amount of player interaction. Once you play 7 rounds, then you're going to finish out the game, and the game scoring is based off of the level in which each of your 3 stats have made it up the track, as well as how many fortifications that you've had in play, or based off of the different building types that you've put out onto your board or the shared board. The more you lean into anything specific, the more points you're going to get back. Also, as the game goes on, the first 3 rounds, new scoring conditions are going to be revealed to inform players of bonus scoring opportunities that are going to happen if you do what the king dictates, which there's no penalties if you don't do them, but you get a lot of points if you succeed at them. And then after all that said, you do a lot of crunchy math in order to do all of your scoring, then the most points wins. And that is the game in a nutshell. Now, this is already getting kind of long, but for a casual video in which I didn't even really intend to do this review, that's okay. So let's start fawning about this game and talk about some of the things that I really absolutely loved. This game is all about finding a rhythm and then accelerating the tempo as you're playing the game. Initially, you're going to feel like you're making small exchanges in order to reap some small rewards, but as you play, as you start to get a little bit further in any of these notches, you're going to see that you're cultivating an accelerated pace in which you're acquiring resources that can be pivoted into another thing. And if you like games where there's an exchange of one thing to another thing to another thing, and you get that awesome feeling of like the wheels are really greased and working together, then this is that. This game is so much about the feeling that you have successfully chained so many micro actions together in order to reap really generous rewards. And I don't think I've ever played a game that executes on that premise quite so well as this. Like I said earlier, it's not exactly an engine building game in the sense that you're going to reach a true sense of automation, but you do have a lot of ability to cultivate a system in which there's going to be more efficient and more advantageous actions, which is really nice. Another thing that I really love about this game is that it ends up developing in a certain way that makes it so you can't 100% know exactly what you're doing in advance, and you have to be reactionary to a degree, because I find that if all the information is available from the get-go, then it really becomes an over-analytical affair. But by revealing certain scoring conditions as well as eventually the worker placement spots that are going to open up, which are randomized from a larger pool with some of them going back into the box, it not only increases suspense, but it also allows you to have that great feeling of, oh, now that that's revealed, ooh, I could do that. All of the scoring conditions and all of the new revealed worker placement spots are incredibly important for you to consider as you go forward building out your strategy, and it becomes increasingly desperate as you get closer to the end of the game to make sure that you've really executed on all of these things or taken advantage of those worker placement spots as they became available. Also, the worker placement itself is really interesting and I think incredibly thematic. Like, I like the idea that all of the different workers represent different aspects of this community in medieval Europe. I think this takes place in France, but I really haven't gone too deep into the history here. But nonetheless, all the workers represent different aspects of the society. And I find that the different colors of workers not only makes for an interesting puzzle for you to solve, but it's also a nice point of thematic immersion, and it looks pretty cool on the table. That actually pivots into the last thing that I really wanted to highlight as far as like overall game impressions here, is that the multi-use aspect of this game, which in some ways was what made it so intimidating first for me to try to get it to the table, I really loved. I adore that so much information was jam-packed into this game, and there are so many decisions that could be made based off of the materials that are at your disposal. I mean, the player board itself is this long flat rectangle that is surrounded by items and then has spaces on it, and it is kind of overwhelming to look at first, but realizing that these spaces that accelerate in their level of how much faith or strength that you have to have in order to put barracks or priests out on in order to get one-time rewards, that same level of threshold for the stats also applies to the invaders that you could convert for their bottom bonus, or the discard from attacking them for their top bonus. I love that on your player board, when you take an action for a lot of the different actions that you can take a lesser version of that action and get just a little bit of a reward, or you can commit multiple workers in order to take a bigger, more powerful, more potent, and more awesome version of that action, but that takes more resources. Again, the multi-use, multi-layered approach to this game gives it so much nuance, and it makes it feel like you could play many different strategies and come out with viable outcomes, so long as you know how to pivot from one turn to another turn to another turn to another turn. And the joy is just seeing that emerge as you play, rather than the ultimate realization of whether you won or not, which is really cool. The last thing that I really want to mention is solo. I mean, solo in this game does exactly what the rest of the game does. It allows you to play your game exactly as you would against a multiplayer opponent, but the automated opponent simulates the experience of having someone take advantage of different spaces or accelerate past you in certain ways without all of the overhead of actually performing all the actions for the opponent. Like anything else in this game as well, it is complex in order to get the automated opponent going at first. Understanding what's going on, that's several more pages of rules, and understanding just how to perform the kind of bizarro universe versions of your actions is a little bit to grog. You got to wrap your brain around it. But once you get playing, it all becomes familiar, and it's more about the decision space, and it really doesn't become that much overhead to operate. Now, there are some things about this game that aren't going to work for everyone. One, it is a very complex worker placement game in a world in which things are trying to make games as approachable as possible. This is a complex and complicated game, not so much so that I think it's impossible for someone who's into mid-weight games to wrap their brain around, but this is a game that demands a level of attention and brain power and time that may not be something that everyone wants to commit to. And, of course, as was my initial problem, learning this game can be a bear in order to account for all the different things that you can do. It is very unique, it is very rewarding, and it is a game that I want to play a lot more of than my experience with multiplayer and solo, which have been excellent so far, but it is something that it took me several tries to really feel confident that I was ready to play the game. But if those are the costs, the rewards, the benefits, the outcome is so much more. I was a fool to have nearly passed on this game, and I am so glad that I didn't. This is one of the most exciting and interesting games that I've played in a while, and as a dedicated fan of worker placement and someone who has liked Shem's games before, and the artwork from the Mio, the artist, is really incredible. The presentation is something to behold on the table, and it is a very immersive and interesting Euro game in a way that I haven't really gotten this feeling in quite a long time from this style of game. So, if you like complex games, you like Euro games, you like games that are elegant in their complexity, not elegant in its reduction of complexity, which is a really cool thing too, but elegant in how it handles an expansive decision matrix, then this is a game that is worth considering. And that's our review. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Jack for the Cardboard Herald.